what the heck is a list? So a list can include your clients. So you can have a list that's only your clients or your membership, as Gary mentioned earlier. It can be a list of people who have expressed the desire or are thinking about working with you. It can be people who have attended events. So all of you are on a list with the phone lady at the moment, for sure. You can create a list based on maybe something you've created that's a download, and people give you their email in order to download that item, that PDF, whatever it is. And so you could have a list from that. You could have a list of people who subscribe to a blog or a newsletter that you create. And of course, those of you that know me well know that that's a big part of my brand, is my weekly newsletter that goes out to everybody. And also, it can be a list of people you want to work with if you've met them somewhere or connected with them somewhere and they have given you permission, which Linda's going to talk to us a little bit about, to be on your list. So when I give workshops in person, I haven't figured out the virtual part yet. I will always ask people if they want to sign up for my blog so I can grow my list that way. So I want to work with them again, so I want to add them to a list.
And if I could just interject there, Mary Jane, the list doesn't have to be a list that you're sending newsletters to. You know, with
right.
Would be your prospecting list, right? So you want to track, as you know, and I know you'll get to that stuff, but it's not necessarily everybody on your list is people you're planning to send a newsletter to.
Right. You can have different lists. They can have different purposes. You can have one list, many lists. So what are you going to do with your list? Now, I think you all have a list. You may not know you have a list. And again, Linda will talk to you about that. But once you have a list, then you're able to, or you're working with your list, you can send them information on upcoming events. Like you all received something from me, I'm assuming, or you found it on social to come to this webinar. If you've got new product or service information. So I have a list that's only clients. And I send something to them every 2.5 months. It's called an occasional newsletter. And so when I have created a new webinar, or I think the best example really is at the beginning of our pandemic situation, I sent out a newsletter letting my clients know that I was working with teams about how to improve remote communication between team members. And that brought me in work instantly because people weren't aware I had that webinar available. So it can be about events, new product or service information. It can be a blog or a newsletter, but it doesn't have to be. So I know that people get intimidated about the blog/newsletter process. I can tell you, you shouldn't be intimidated by it, but that's a conversation you can have with Linda on your own. Maybe you have a discount or an offer. Maybe you're doing a survey. If you've got membership, maybe you're keeping them all up to date on various things, especially now, that relate to their behavior, their safety during the pandemic. I think we've all been receiving emails from memberships from organizations we're part of. So in my case, the Center for Women and Business, the Chamber, Halifax Business, they've all been sending out regular information with updates on COVID-19 reopening, all those kinds of things, so that I'm on their list, right? So why is it important? You won't, for those of you that are marketing and entrepreneurs and freelancers, you can have a great conversation with somebody, a great meeting with somebody, they can be excited about a proposal you sent them, and then they can disappear. And they disappear because their life got busy. It's really got nothing to do with you, but you aren't top of mind anymore.
Yeah.
And I know for sure that I've been able to grow the Phone Lady because I make sure I am regularly top of mind. And that blog of mine, when it goes out on Sunday evenings, inevitably brings me work, or at least a conversation with somebody I haven't spoken to before or in a while. Either because the person who received it goes, I need to talk to Mary Jane, or they share it with somebody and say, you and I were talking about this, you should call this woman. So it's that top of mind is incredibly valuable in growing a business and in engaging a membership, right? So keeping your membership engaged is really great. So you can receive repeat business from existing clients. You can take cold prospects and make them warm and even hot by staying top of mind. You get to continually grow your brand. And that serves us when we want our companies to thrive for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever we're wanting to do. The stronger our brand is, the better things are. And you can get traction on new ideas and events. Not always, but I've certainly created a few downloads and had a few ideas that I thought, wow, people are going to love this, and I haven't gotten any traction on them. But that's life, right?
But you wouldn't if you didn't try, right? So
yeah, exactly. But the fact that I didn't get traction was information, right? And I've done great surveys and white papers with people. Because they're on my list, I can send out a survey, as I've mentioned. So there's all kinds of things you can do to get to know your target market better, to increase awareness of the work you do, and to grow your brand. So having a list and working a list, really important. So now I'm going to let Linda do all the talking. So as I mentioned, she is the owner of Daily Progress, and it's so cool that her last name gave her such a great company name. She works with a really wide variety of people and individuals, but her heart is with small business and their online marketing. And really, she places list building very high on a priority for companies that want to grow. And so her website is there, and as part, of attending this webinar, you're going to get a copy of this PowerPoint, so you'll have her contact information. So Linda, my first question is, what is it that you most value about a list?
Well, a list, having a mailing list in particular. I mean, we talked about all those different uses, but having a mailing list has really enabled me to stay in touch with people for long periods of time. I started building my list. I started my business in 2005, started email marketing in 2010. And, I'm still in touch with people who I met in those first 2 or 3 years of starting my business because of my list. Sometimes it's just me sending stuff, but lots of times I get, responses or people signing up for things. And it's always kind of cool, especially when I reconnect with someone that I can specifically remember certain people I met that first year I had my business, right? And, keep maintaining that connection. And I wouldn't have done that so well if I didn't have them on a list. It's as simple as that. A list, once you get someone on a list, you have that opportunity to, ask them to sign up for a webinar, offer them something, tell them about, an in-person event. Personally, I think the first step that every small business owner needs to do when they meet somebody is get that person on their list. It's more important than connecting. I mean, I'm a social media person too, I get that, but You know, a list is, you can be more specific about your communications with people for sure.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's it. You know, it's really get them on a list.
And one of the things I should have done, and I'll do tomorrow, is I should have had a poll ready to go. But my guess is that everybody already has a list. Is that a fair thing to say?
I'm getting some chats. No. Oh, we see a no.
Do you think that everybody already has a list?
Yeah, well, everybody has a list. They just might not think of it in the way of a list, the list we're talking about. And we're not talking about to-do lists here. We've got lots of those too, but lists with names, and we all have them. I mean, we have in our email apps, we have people that are in our address book. That's a list. You have, you know, if you're doing a newsletter or a blog or something like that, mailing regularly, there's a list. If you have a CRM, a customer relationship management system, there's a list. And, you know, if you're doing Thinkific courses, there's another list, you know, so we all have a lot of lists. We just don't often think of them in terms of being a tool to communicate with people. You know, think of it from a strategic standpoint of the communication. And it's always nice to have those lists all in one place so you can manage them.
And to some degree, not that you can export and import this, but even your LinkedIn contacts, for example, are a type of list. Oh, somebody's just said that.
Yeah.
Yeah, our link, Maria Fernanda, thanks for being here, by the way. So yes, the people that you've connected with on LinkedIn are a type of list.
And at one time, you used to be able to download that list.
Yes.
Can't anymore, because at one time, that was advice I gave to people who were starting a newsletter, to download their LinkedIn contacts. Now, I didn't tell them just download and then upload it to your newsletter, but download that and go through it to pick out, like, it's a good way to pick out the people who might not already be in your, you know, your email app, or, you know, your mailing, your address book and that kind of thing, right?
So here's something that is interesting. So Penny McCauley is saying 33% open rate. And I know do you want to address that? Because what is a good open rate when you send something to your list?
Industry averages, well, if it was three or 4 years ago, I would have said about 20% open rate. It's kind of gone up a little bit. It's maybe more sitting around 22%, but it really varies by how often you send, you know, how big your list is, how well you know the people on your list, how good your subject line is. You know, that subject line, you know, as far as whether people open, it's really two parts of that decision. It's based on the subject line and or the person who sent it. So people make decisions about opening based on generally one of those two things, right? And I want to mention too that there's value in being seen in the inbox, even if people aren't opening.
Absolutely. And I got two other things here I'm just going to address quickly and then ask you another question. So Angela Penton, thanks for being here, and Vicky Nee. Both your questions relate to spam. And so we're going to touch on that today, and then Linda has some additional information. But Vicky, the reason that you can export LinkedIn, but you can't start emailing to them because of spam legislation throughout the world, but we're going to focus on Canada and the US. So, if we've helped somebody understand that they have a list, but they're not using it, what are the first 3 steps you would advise them to get started, or even the first 1 step? Like, what would you tell them to do next?
I'm prepared. So the first step I would say is just to start. So start putting them, you know, it makes sense to put them all in one place if you want to start doing emailing, you know, a newsletter or something like that. But start, because if, you know, it can be a tedious job of gathering up, for the first time, kind of going through and gathering all your contacts together in one place. You can start with putting them all in a spreadsheet or a Word doc or something like that if you want. Or you can go get an app. Like, so I'm a channel partner with Active Campaign, but there, you know, there's MailChimp, there's a bunch of them. You can just start putting your contacts in there. If you start with a spreadsheet, spreadsheets upload nicely into those. And sometimes it's easier to kind of go through and manage, you know, those kinds of things in a spreadsheet. So, and I've been through this with a lot of clients over the years. It can be tedious and time consuming. It may be something that you can, you know, delegate to your virtual admin or, you know, someone else for that matter as well. But it's certainly, my advice is just start, because what happens is you end up having something that you want to announce to people, you want to tell people about, you know. So even though you're thinking, oh, I'm not going to do a newsletter or whatever, but then something happens. You plan an event, you plan a webinar, you put on a special offer, you know, you have a new product, and suddenly you want to send it to people and you don't have it set up, or you don't have that opportunity because you don't have it. So,
and one of the things to think about is, you know, I started my list, I don't know, I'm going to say 10 years ago. So I did a lot of it on my own, but you really want to start automating the processes so that it isn't a matter of always having an Excel spreadsheet that you're uploading into MailChimp or whatever. And again, that's not that there aren't other people, but that's Linda's expertise, is to figure out what that automation is so that you're constantly building your list without even knowing that you're building your list, right?
Yes, I only like the spreadsheet at the beginning when you're getting set up.
Yeah.
And once you get set up, it's trying to automate all those things. So for example, when someone books a call with me through Acuity, which is the app I use for, you know, my calendar booking, it automatically adds them to my list, to my Active Campaign account. Not necessarily to a list, but into my account.
Well, and you've connected my request form on my website to my CRM.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a lot of automation in the background, which I would have ignored. And I'm not here as an expert at all. I would have made this very complicated, and I would not have the list I have if I didn't have somebody like Linda who understands the automation and making those links and making it time efficient. So if you're going to dig in and try to do it yourself and you've got other priorities, it's totally worth paying somebody else to figure it out, because it is fussy. Is that a fair thing to say, that it's fussy to get those automations in place? And
yeah, so it's integration and automation, which, you know, are big words, but integration is where you're connecting different apps together. So for example, if you have a CRM system and you have an email system that aren't the same, although there are lots these days that are combined, they can talk to each other.
Yeah.
Right? So, and a great example is the email that will go out just before this webinar ends. You know, it was scheduled early this morning, yes, but anyone who signed up this morning is still going to get it because of the automation that was set up.
Right. Okay. So I want to make sure, we got 9 minutes left, and I do want to talk about briefly anti-spam legislation. So there's CASL here in Canada. There's a different acronym in the US. Tell us a little bit about that. I know you've got a webinar coming up that's going to get into it in more depth for everybody, but tell us a little bit about that.
So without going deep, it's important for any business owners to know that there are differences between, because there are so many exemptions to the legislation for certain types of businesses and certain things. It's important to realize that if you're a business to consumer type business, the rules for you are a little tighter than they are if you're a business to business type of business.
Yeah.
And you actually have more freedom to add people to your list if you're business to business.
Right. So some of the examples I think I can share, and Linda will catch me if I'm not being truthful. You know, when I was doing face-to-face workshops with large groups of people, I would circulate a piece of paper and say, if you if you're comfortable with my adding you to my blog list, give me your email address.
Yeah.
And in doing that, they've given me direct permission to put them on that list.
Yeah.
And also, if somebody advertises or makes their email easily available, so for example, if you come to my website, my email's everywhere. So you can email me once, correct?
Yeah, as long as it's related to your business.
Right. So don't email me about a postage meter.
Okay. Or, well, that could be a business thing for you.
Oh, I suppose.
But don't email you about vacuum cleaners or Tupperware, and I'm not picking on any of those things. But
right.
Don't email you anything as a consumer. It has to relate directly to your role in your business.
Right. So it's important for everybody to understand what the rules are. For those of you that are business to consumer, as Linda says, it's a lot tighter legislation than if it's business to business, because they expect business people to want to connect regularly. But Linda's going to do a webinar specifically about that, and the email you're going to get at the end of this will include a link to register for that webinar if you're interested in that. And so we've only touched on this very briefly, but once you have this list, where do you put it? So I know you have a favorite platform, but I'm sure there have to be many. Is that fair to say?
So you want to have, I think, a list in your CRM specifically for your customers and for prospecting, of course, or whatever words we're using around that stuff, business development, right, these days. And you want to have a list of people who you are going to send regular or intermittent communications to about your business. Those can be the same. They might not be, though. So for instance, my favorite is Active Campaign. I'm a channel partner with them, and they have several upgraded systems, but one of their solutions is an integrated CRM with your bulk email platform. However, if you're using, for example, say a MailChimp and that's another CRM, Salesforce, for instance, you can have those talk to each other. So it has information back and forth between them.
So is choosing the system something you should take the time to figure out what bells and whistles that system has?
Yeah. And initially, when someone's starting out, you probably just want to go simple because it can get pretty complex.
Okay.
But one thing to watch out for is you want to make sure you're using an app that can be integrated with other apps.
Okay, fair enough. And so Vicky Nee has asked us a question. So a new client who's starting a new business, or a client that's starting a new business, I believe she's allowed to email her existing client list, inviting them to subscribe.
Yes.
So
anyone you've done business with. So this goes for, well, it's implied for business to business.
Right.
But for business to consumer, anyone you've done business with, you have permission to add them to your list.
And she's asking that question that I know drives you crazy, that she's required to do a double opt-in, and I know no. Okay, so there's no double opt-in business to business.
Even with consumers, so double opt-in is not a legal requirement anywhere in Canada and the US, and never has been.
Okay.
So I'll repeat that, never has been. Now, there's a big myth out there that it's a legal requirement, but it's not.
It's a rumor. It's a rumor that that's needed.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to know is that there may be instances where you want to do a double opt-in. I'm not saying there may not be, but I don't come across those very often. And if someone has a double opt-in, I generally recommend. Now, you do want to make sure you've got something like a CAPTCHA in place so that people can prove they're human, check that box.
Right, so you don't get a lot of robotic stuff happening, spam.
So if you can't get a CAPTCHA, doing a double opt-in is a way to avoid that.
Okay.
But it's, you know, a
So
CAPTCHA, you don't want to
if
make people who are subscribing, if someone's expressed an interest, you don't want to make them do extra work.
no, exactly.
Right?
So if you've got questions or comments, let us know.